Good evening and good morning, depending on wherever you are joining from. I, Purushendra Singh, on behalf of Cuts International, pleased to welcome everyone to this issue-specific and timely webinar. The theme of today's webinar is Ties That Bind, the India-U.S. relationship in 2023, whether strategic, transactional, or in between. Before we dive into the fruitful discussion, just setting up some house announcements. Today's session will be of 1 hour long, and 45 minutes would be dedicated to the panel discussion, and then rest 15 would be for Q&A. We encourage the members of the panel to keep their cameras on during the session. Also, keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking. This session is being recorded live stream simultaneously on YouTube, and the same will be released later on Cuts YouTube channel. It is encouraged that the audience member post their question indicating relevant speakers directly to me in the chat box. With this, I would like to invite Mr. Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General of Cuts International, for his welcome remarks.
Let me welcome our distinguished panelists, Meera, Seema, Michael, and our moderator Jyoti. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you, and particularly in this 40th year of our existence, the 40th anniversary. It's another significant event that we think will be added to the annals of our history as we go along. At Cuts, we have diligently worked, and happy to say that our voices have been heard around the world. With our 6th overseas center in Washington, D.C., we aim to become one of the leading advocates of the India-U.S. relationship. It is a defining strategic partnership and an evolving one. As we trudge along, this bilateral relationship would encompass more convergences on supply chain resilience, enhancing energy security, advancing inclusive digital trade, and robust defense partnership, among others. On the subject of today's webinar, I would like to mention that it is an opportune moment for Honorable Prime Minister Modi to raise the need to revitalize multilateralism, particularly trade multilateralism, with President Biden. We had both India and USA had very good cooperation in the run-up to the WTO's Ministerial Conference 12th at Geneva in June 22, which helped the international community to arrive at a consensus. One issue discussed there was the two-tier WTO dispute settlement system with an effective appellate body. This needs to be restored as soon as possible. This system has been of great advantage to the global south, as poor countries could challenge and win trade disputes against rich countries. Both India and US are key stakeholders in the rules-based multilateral trading system and need to lead from the front and work together to find solutions. In fact, we are organizing another event on this very issue next Tuesday on 20th June to deliberate on how India and US can collaborate to give fresh energy to trade multilateralism, and we hope to see many of you there as well. Only today I noticed a news item where Representative McCormick from Georgia or someplace, speaking about the visit of the Prime Minister Modi, as well as speaking about as to how they've, he cautioned that, look, let us not underestimate India as compared to what is happening because of the way China has used the WTO, misguided the rules, as against that India has been a fair player in the WTO system as well. Having said that, both India's and America's strengths have derived from the diverse experience, cultures, ethos, communities, and common approach towards a functioning democracy, which is the bedrock of this relationship. This would be further enhanced when Prime Minister Modi celebrates the Yoga Day in New York on the 21st of June. I would appeal to all to join him in this endeavor to keep yourself healthy. As of today, US is the largest trading partner for India and is en route to become its largest defense partner as well. This is, of course, subject to transfer of technology making in India and at reasonable prices. We understand that the importance of this partnership is a shared commitment to address regional and global challenges and hence to wish to buttress the economic and strategic ties between our two countries. Furthermore, we do hope that the US and India can cooperate in assisting African countries under a trilateral development mode with the participation of civil society, business chambers, academia, etc., for various issues which can help to grow and reduce poverty. As it is, India has had a relationship with the US in terms of trilateral development cooperation projects in Africa, and the moment India is also has many such projects with many European countries as well. And that I think I would like to underline, and for the simple reason that Kutch is very active in Africa. Since the year 2000, we have 3 offices in Africa. The trouble is, and particularly Zambia, where we started in 2000, is suffering from huge debt crisis uh, due to conditionalities imposed by China, which has invested a large amount through loans in the African infrastructure area. And this is a universal phenomenon across most countries in Africa. That said, what is important to see with the upcoming state visit is a roadmap to be laid out until 2047, as India plans to be a developed nation by then, leaving no one behind. I hope the distinguished speakers will address these issues in its full bloom. Equally important is to see how both of us tackle common concerns such as the economic slowdown, impacts of both climate crisis as well as biodiversity, unemployment, food and energy insecurity, global supply chain disruptions, and concerns regarding free and open Indo-Pacific. As India is hosting the G20 summit in its capacity as the current chair, we hope that multilateralism is revitalized and we could jointly make this world a better place to live in. I would now like to invite the esteemed panelists and the moderator Jyoti to please take this forward in a very timely and important discussion. Thank you very much. Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mehta. Thank you, Purushendra. And first of all, I'd like to thank Kutch for inviting me to moderate this webinar and to thank all of you for participating in it. I am joining the time zones between India and the US, between Washington, DC and New Delhi. Ambassador Meera Shankar, India's former ambassador to the US from 2009 to 11, when former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also went on a state visit to the US, and now Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is, of course, just one of, he's one of 3 Indian Prime Ministers who is going to be undertaking this visit to the US. From Washington, DC, I have Michael Kugelman, who is the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, very well-known think tank in the US, and Seema Sirohi, an old friend, a fellow journalist, columnist at the Economic Times, but Seema has reported, analyzed, done lots of work from the US. She has a book to her credit, and I hope that all of you who are going to be sort of hearing Seema will buy that book. So Seema, I hope you will tell us a little bit about the book as well. So let me just start immediately, get the ball rolling. And let me just talk a little bit about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit and the topic of this seminar, of this webinar. The topic is the India-US ties that bind the India-US relationship, strategic, transactional, or in between. And I think those 3 words are very, very important. Is this relationship, is it becoming a strategic relationship, or is it merely a transactional one that India is going to co-produce a jet engine between Hindustan Aeronautics as well as GE? It is a big deal, and I'm not going to decry that at all, but is it something that is just that you buy from the Americans, or is it going to be more than that, or is it in between? So Ambassador Meera Shankar, may I ask you to kick off this discussion? And each of you, I'm going to be very strict with my time machine, so each of you have 6 minutes or maybe 5 minutes and 59 seconds. So Ambassador Shankar, I'd like you to start. Thank you.
Can I just interrupt you, Meera, just a sec? I would like to recognize another illustrious participant in this event, former Foreign Secretary, former Ambassador to the US, Harsh Shingla, who had told me that he would be here just as a participant and will not speak. Harsh, thank you very much for not speaking and hearing us. Over to you.
Well, Jyoti, that's an interesting question. I would say that we had a formal strategic partnership with the United States, but it's taken a while to build the degree of trust that we can actually move forward substantively. You know, from a position where we bought no defense equipment from the US, we moved towards gradually buying equipment. Then we moved towards changing the norms and regulations which applied to India, giving it the status of the US's closest allies. And still there was hesitation in actually looking at any defense relationship beyond purchase. You know, we had the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative launched under President Obama. There were some pilot projects that we undertook under it, but these were of a minor nature. And substantive areas of cooperation, I think there was still hesitation. So this deal for GE engines to be manufactured in India, the 414 engine, with Hindustan Aeronautics Limited is a great deal. Given the US's reluctance, I don't think they have shared jet engine technology production capabilities with any of their other partners. Now, for India, it's important, I would say, if we take a strategic view of it. That is, we don't look at using this to just buy wholesale US platforms, but it powers our Tejas, the first one, which we felt didn't have enough thrust or power. And this GE engine will have a more powerful thrust. It is more fuel efficient. So we integrate it into Tejas Mark II, and hopefully we carry on this process of developing our own technologies, benefiting from the capability upgradation, which strategic imports from the US can provide. So the key is going to be, even with this engine technology, how much of value addition will be done in India. You know, if it is a pure assembly operation where we just get the parts and we integrate them together, that might be the case. But the aim should be to gradually expand the domestic value addition in India. But it is a big deal given the hesitations in the US establishment about this. Now, it also flows in a certain context because both countries have had to work around their differing perspectives on Ukraine. And to the credit of both sides, though reluctantly, the US has come to understand the strategic imperatives which India has with regard to Russia. And concern has been expressed in the US Congress that more should be done by the US by way of access to technology and weapons to wean India away from Russia or to reduce India's dependence on Russia for defense equipment. For India, that's not our main objective. Our main objective is upgradation of our capacities. So I would say this is a big deal. Second element that we are seeing is a decision on purchase of 30 Predator drones, armed Predator drones, where we have, I think the Defense Ministry has approved a request for proposal, and it'll go to the cabinet for approval, and then it'll go to the US side for their. That would again mark a considerable upgrade in the level of technology, because till now we have been buying mainly surveillance aircraft and transport aircraft from the US. This would again mark an upgradation in technology. The third element is the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which was signed between the NSAs of the two sides, Jake Sullivan and Ajit Doval. And this is looking at areas such as semiconductors, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and space. And of course, renewable energies. From what I've read in the papers, if it materializes, it would be a very good thing that Micron, the US company Micron, is possibly thinking of investing, over $1 billion. I think somewhere I read $3.7 billion maybe, to
Right.
set up a semiconductor manufacturing facility in India. Now, if again, India and US use this opportunity to create resilient supply chains, de-risking over-dependence on China, I think, again, that will provide a substantive kind of leap to the relationship, because there is a window of opportunity where both countries could benefit. The US in terms of enhancing its global competitiveness in technologies by cooperating with Indian companies, and India in terms of getting the kind of manufacturing access to higher technology and becoming a part of more resilient global supply chains where it is not today. I mean, we are making a shift in telecommunications, where we now apparently a mobile export of mobile phones from India is the #2 export after refined oil.
Sure.
Even though the total value addition in India is limited because we import quite a number of the components. So I would say it's a big deal, Jyoti.
So thank you so much, Ambassador Shankar, for laying out the big picture in a sense, and also talking about some of the detail. Michael Kugelman, may I come to you next and ask you what you think from your standpoint in Washington, D.C. What does America think of the relationship with India?
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, it's great to be here. I definitely think that the U.S.-India relationship is a strategic partnership, and I'll get into why. But I've been asked to briefly comment on the driving force behind U.S. outreach to India and the relationship. And the core driver of this heavy U.S. engagement with India today, both bilaterally and multilaterally, is a shared concern about China. And that's something that we all know. Washington, on bipartisan levels, I should say, views India as an important country to work with in its efforts to counter Chinese power for a variety of reasons. India's own rivalry and strategic competition with China, its geographic location, its large economy, its military power, and so on. But it wasn't always like this, of course. And if you look at how U.S.-India partnership has evolved over the last few decades, there have been a variety of anchors for cooperation. In the early 90s, after India's liberalization reforms, it was a strengthening partnership. In the immediate post 9/11 era, it became counterterrorism, and more recently, it's become China. Two quick reminders on this. One is that U.S.-India partnership did not begin in the early 1990s. I mean, there have been periods prior to that when you had pretty strong partnership as well. If you look at for example, the late 1950s and early 1960s, Washington was seeking deeper partnership with New Delhi then. And the second reminder is that U.S.-India cooperation vis-a-vis China is not something that has emerged only in recent years. Back during the Eisenhower and the Kennedy administrations, Washington saw India as an important player in efforts to counter a then rising China. Hence the famous Eisenhower visit to New Delhi in 1959, and of course the JFK administration's support for India during the 1960 war with China. Things would of course change soon thereafter, and especially after 1971. But coming back to the present, U.S. engagement with India is certainly driven mainly by the China issue, but it clearly goes deeper than that. And here I come to this question of strategic partnership versus transactional partnership. And again, from the perspective of Washington, the relationship with India is very much a strategic one. Generally speaking, the U.S. definition of a strategic relationship is one with a high degree of defense cooperation, intelligence sharing, the trust and goodwill that are preconditions for those types of collaborations. Strategic partnerships from a U.S. perspective also entail substantive levels of partnership across many different spheres. And I think you can check off all of those boxes with U.S.-India relations today. Defense cooperation, of course, has increased significantly in recent years. You just look, for example, at the inking of the different foundational defense agreements that allow the two militaries to work more closely. U.S. intelligence is being shared with India that has helped New Delhi deal with the China challenge on its border. India and the U.S. are also cooperating in many different spheres that go beyond China and Indo-Pacific and more broadly geopolitical issues. Tech issues, as we've already heard, have become, I think, one of the biggest growth areas of partnership. Same with climate, with clean energy, along with higher education exchanges, science research, from space issues to cybersecurity. So U.S. outreach is driven by a desire to strengthen cooperation with India in a variety of spaces to ensure and further strategic partnership. But there are certainly some challenges to this U.S. outreach, and I'll conclude here. Certainly in terms of some disagreements and divergences on policy issues, including some of those like tech that are now major focus areas of cooperation. But I'd argue that there are two fundamental challenges to U.S. outreach, one of which relates to India's internal policies and the other to external policies. In terms of the internal, Washington, it's important to emphasize this, though it takes a muted public position, it is concerned about what it views to be democratic backsliding in India. And it's trying to figure out how to strike a balance between taking a values-based approach to the relationship with India and taking an interest-based approach to it. The official messaging of the relationship emphasizes both, but from the U.S. perspective, there are risks to strategic partnership, obviously, if concerns about rights and democracy are elevated in the policy agenda. And so that's not going to happen for understandable reasons. The other challenge to U.S. outreach relates to India's external policies, and specifically its decision, as we all know, not to participate in the alliance system to safeguard its strategic autonomy. And there's been a lot of talk, I know, in both capitals about Ashley Tellis's piece in Foreign Affairs. His contention is that the U.S. cannot expect India to be an ally in the sense of a true U.S. ally, but that's well known. I think the bigger, more interesting question from a U.S. perspective is how to keep growing out security partnership outside of this alliance system. What does that look like? And here, the U.S. faces certain constraints. India is not about to sign on to mutual defense pacts, for example. But I would argue that strategic partnership is very possible. It could flourish and be sustained without alliance. And alliance is not a precondition for strategic partnership. And here, I think the example of Pakistan can be constructive. Pakistan is formally a U.S. ally, but in practice, the relationship is not alliance-like. And it certainly is not a strategic partnership based on the definition I laid out earlier. So yeah, I think that generally speaking, the trajectory for this partnership is very strong, despite notable challenges. And it is indeed a strategic partnership so far as I see it.
Right. Thanks, Michael. I think we will talk about the challenges over the next hour, half an hour or so. But Seema, can I come to you? And friends, I remember the name of Seema's book. It's called Friends with Benefits. And I'm hoping, Seema, that you have a copy of the book so you can show it to us. But if you don't, that's also fine. But so here is a pitch to go out and buy it. But Seema, the question to you is, and here is a question that I would put on your journalist hat, which you're very good at doing, and tell us, both Michael and Ambassador Meera Shankar tell us that this is a strategic relationship, or one that the US sees it that way. So does India, of course. Why? Why does the US see the India-US relationship as a strategic one? And second, if a lot of this is about China, remember that 4 days before Prime Minister Modi comes to the US, comes to Washington, D.C. on the 22nd of June, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is going to be in Beijing. Now, Jake Sullivan was in Delhi just a day or so ago, and he, over the last few years, has very clearly said that the US is looking at peaceful competition with China, not so clearly the Americans are making an outreach towards China. So on the one hand, they talk about this, about the Chinese being their key competitor, but on the other hand, there is this outreach. So explain what's going on.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you to CUTS International for inviting me. So what's happening with China is very interesting. the Biden administration has taken forward the Trump administration's Indo-Pacific policy and to sort of name China as a rival. But at the same time, they are worried in Washington that it could become from a Cold War, that it should not become a hot war, because there's just so much going on in terms of Chinese actions against various countries in the Indo-Pacific. So I think the meetings between US officials and Chinese officials are meant to prevent any kind of breakout and to put what they call guardrails. So that's good for the whole world, isn't it? I don't think India would like a conflagration in the Indo-Pacific. Having said that, what's also clear is that the Americans, after 20, 25 years, have finally woken up to the Chinese threat. As I say in my book, that all of the technology that the Americans are now trying to sort of de-risk, decouple, call it whatever you will, is technology that they sold willingly, openly, and for money. US corporates were selling like crazy in the 90s, especially during the Bill Clinton administration. So at that time, India was a non-country for them in terms of strategic objectives, right? We were more of a headache for them. Pakistan was one important pillar of US policy in South Asia, and China was another. And we were sort of in between two stools till the nuclear deal and the very important joint statement of 2005 that led to the deal in 2008. So now what I would say is that gradualism of the US recognition of India being an important country and a country that they should have a partnership with has broken into instant action. If you see the last 1 year, the kind of intense diplomatic engagement the two countries have had, almost anybody and everybody has gone to India. We hear about the top officials' visits, but at the mid-level, there are a lot of visits happening about which neither country briefs the journalists. That's the bane of our existence. So you heard the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin say that we are at a transformative moment in history, because finally the Americans are going to actually help India develop a defense industrial base. This is very, very important. There's a complete change in mindset. Why? I think it's mainly because of the China factor. We can embellish it by other things, but mainly the China factor, I would see.
Okay.
And so now this dialogue of ISET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, is now the overall arching framework under which we are going to do many, many things together, whether it's AI, quantum, semiconductors, and defense. So this is a very important dialogue, and a lot has happened in just 1 year. It's mind-boggling, actually, because I've tracked this relationship for now almost 30 years, and things just don't move. Like it's, very glacial compared to what's happening today.
Yeah. Ambassador Shankar, can I come back to you? And let me pick up from where Seema left off. She's talking about how it used to be this sort of glacial relationship. Things moved very slowly, and suddenly it's all over the place. And I just want to tell my viewers this little factoid. Jake Sullivan, who was in Delhi less than 24 hours ago or 36 hours ago, is only 46 years old, which means that in 1971, when India and Pakistan went to war with each other in December of 1971, Jake Sullivan wasn't even born. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the USS Enterprise, when it sort of was sailing into the Bay of Bengal and warning India that it cannot attack Pakistan, that has sort of been embedded into the subconscious of the Indian public, if you like. Now, from there, Ambassador Shankar, it's been 53 years or 52 years since the 1971 war. It's been a huge sea change, right? So would you say that, India is still a very poor country, of course, the world's largest population now, but is it just the China factor, or is it, as Michael Kugelman says, that there are still concerns about values and, of freedom of speech, of dissent in India that the Democrat administration is still concerned about?
Look, firstly, I would say that, there's no constants in foreign or strategic policy. You saw that, with Nixon's outreach to China to shift the US-China, USSR strategic triangular balance. And you are seeing that now with the US's outreach to strengthen its alliance systems in the Indo-Pacific, to strengthen its strategic partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, and especially with India. Now, the relationship with India, I would say, is driven, I agree with Michael Kugelman and Seema Sirohi, largely by the convergence of interest around the challenge posed by China to the Indo-Pacific region in particular, and to the broader global order in general. But it's not just zero or one-dimensional. The relationship is not one-dimensional. It's a broad-based one. So you have a business relationship which is thriving, $191 billion in two-way trade in both goods and services last year. So the largest trading partner. For India, the fact that it is one country with whom we actually have a small trade surplus in both goods and services, $54 billion of US investment in India, $40 billion of Indian investment in the United States,
right,
in the NRI community, and the bipartisan consensus, whether it is a Republican or Democratic administration, all have sought to build the relationship with India to a greater or lesser degree. Yes, I think values are important, especially to the Biden administration, which has made democracy and fostering and strengthening democracy a key plank of its foreign policy position in the world. But I think they have handled India delicately on these issues.
Why do you think? Why do you think they're doing that?
Well, I think because they are prioritizing the convergence with regard to China as opposed to human rights values. And they also believe that more could be achieved by quiet discussion with India than hectoring India publicly. I think that's part of our psychology. If we are given, public kind of, do or die alternatives, then the Indians react very stubbornly. So any, I would say, skilled diplomatic establishment would really look at handling it delicately rather than in a very upfront fashion, even though the progressives amongst the Democrats would like more emphasis on this issue. I would say the Biden administration has been relatively subtle in its way of handling it.
Okay, that's really interesting. Michael, can I ask you to comment on what Meera is saying, which is that the Biden administration traditionally, the Democrats, as we know, like to sort of preach to you about human rights. Nothing wrong with human rights. We all believe in human rights, of course. But Ambassador Meera Shankar's point that India doesn't like to be reprimanded publicly or to be spoken to, from sort of this high ground. Do you think that these discussions are taking place behind the parda, behind the scenes? And And I also want you to comment on India's maneuvering between Russia on the one hand, continuing to buy Russian oil, and the US not anymore reprimanding the Indians about buying Russian oil, unlike your former Deputy National Security Advisor, Dalip Singh Saun, did last year when he came to Delhi.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Ambassador Shankar. Indeed, the nature of this relationship between the U.S. and India is such that Washington could really undercut its interests by making the rights and democracy issue a public matter. And indeed, there are plenty of critics, and not just progressive Democrats on Capitol Hill, but others that think the U.S. should take a stronger position on this. But one could fully understand why it doesn't. And naturally, the U.S. will be selective about how it applies this rights and democracy policy. The Biden administration had said that it was going to emphasize values in its foreign policy, but we all knew it was going to be selective. You look at how it's handled this with Bangladesh, for example, very different from the approach it's taken with India. But of course, the difference between India and Bangladesh is that India is a strategic partner. Bangladesh is not, even though recently some U.S. officials have started describing it as such. So I think especially for this visit, this state visit by Prime Minister Modi, this has to be a positive visit. It has to be a success. You can't, from a U.S. perspective, you can't afford to have any type of awkwardness or tension, even in private settings. So that makes me think that you certainly will not hear U.S. officials explicitly bring up these issues of rights and democracy in public settings unless it's caveated by some type of reference to both the U.S. and India, having has some challenges with democracy and rights, and they'll work together. I don't even think it would go that far, quite frankly. But that said, it may come up in some private exchanges. It may be broached by U.S. officials, but not very much, and not in great detail. It won't be pushed because, again, the focus of this trip. The focus of these meetings between Modi and his interlocutors, it has to be successful. It has to be positive, and I think it's quite clear that the U.S. side will want to focus on the areas where there's a lot of good, happy, positive things to talk about. Though certainly, getting to your question about Russia, indeed, they will talk about Russia and Ukraine. That continues to be a top priority issue for the United States, including in the context of the U.S.-India relationship. But we've seen a change, I think, in how the administration has gone about this issue vis-a-vis India. Initially, when the war began, it looked like there were actually some expectations, unrealistic expectations, that the U.S. could pressure India to take a position more in line with the U.S. But clearly that the administration recognizes that's the wrong position to take. And my sense is that the administration is now trying to take a longer view and make the case to India that over the longer term, not now, over the longer term, Russia could become a more difficult security partner for India because it will no longer have the capacity to supply India with the types of weaponry and even commercial products that India has long depended on, because Russia will be war-scarred, cash-strapped, sanctioned, and so on. And I think the U.S. could point to one specific data point, the fact that, as I understand it, deliveries of the S-400 package have been delayed from Russia to India because of the war. And I think that's a data point that the U.S. could point to as an indication that it could be more difficult in the months and years ahead for India to continue to rely on Russia as a security partner.
Okay, Michael, one quick question before I move to Seema, which is that, Ambassador Meera Shankar in her earlier comments referred to the deal between Hindustan Aeronautics and GE on the jet engine deal. Now, is this going to be beyond a co-manufacture or co-production? Will there be a real transfer of technology from the US to India?
Well, that remains to be seen, quite frankly. And I think this gets into one of the other challenges that we could talk about more, if we like, the issue of export controls that I think has made, technology transfers, it's a big priority on both sides, and especially in the context of the growing tech partnership. But, ITAR and, some of these broader constraints to U.S.-India cooperation because of these export controls, of course, happen on both sides, I guess. that continues to be the big challenge, and that's not going to be something that could be surmounted that quickly. So indeed, I think there's a genuine desire on both sides to take things further if this GE deal goes through, but they're going to have to work through these very real obstacles on the issues of export control licenses and so on.
Okay, Seema, the same question to you, which is that will the GE deal, is it a very important deal? Of course, we all understand that. But will it go beyond India purchasing the jet engine for the light combat aircraft, which has been trying to fly for more than 25 years and still is like a bird without wings? And so you need this engine for it to fly. But will there be a real transfer of technology, like actually the Russians have done with India over the decades, very much under the cover? Nobody talks about it, but there has been some. Will the Americans also concede?
Yes, from what I hear, the technology transfer is up to 60%, but it'll be in stages, it'll be over time. And the MOU that will be announced, hopefully, during the Modi's visit, will highlight that. Now, remember that previously, under the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, 2012 or so, after a couple of years, there was a group on jet engine technology that was then suspended because Indian expectations were so high. They wanted 100% technology transfer. Even now, I think if you're realistic, there won't be 100% technology transfer. This is a crown jewel. And no country is going to transfer that, the inner core engine, the metallurgy, everything is very, very advanced. They will probably not share that part of the engine, but they will make other parts of the engine in India. They will train Indian technicians and workers and things like that. So in that sense, it is very important. It is more than what was being considered under DTTI. And what changed the American mind, as we've discussed over the past half an hour? There are many things that have happened. China being one factor, the rise of China, the realization on part of the US that they can't go it alone anymore. They need partners, they need allies. The adjustment by the Americans to understand that you don't necessarily have to sign a treaty in order to work with a country. And if India doesn't want to be an ally, that's okay. Perhaps that's even better in some ways, because then India becomes your link to other parts of the world where you don't have very much clout. Let's say the global south, let's say other Southeast Asian countries. So that, I think, is what's happening. The clarity and commitment that this administration has shown in how to deal with India is quite remarkable, in my opinion. Because earlier it was all very fuzzy, we want to do this, and a lot of rhetoric about two democracies and stuff like that.
Right.
Now, on human rights, I want to say something.
Yeah.
I have noticed that in this administration, there's a very different attitude. Yes, their foreign policy on paper is said to be connected to values. Yes. But there's also a realization among top officials, Blinken has been on the record to say, we are all democracies, works in progress, right? So there's a recognition here in America that they can't absolutely hector anybody. Look at what's happening here in the US. Police, whenever they are in a situation with African Americans, I mean, the first thing is to pull out a gun and shoot them.
Yeah.
And just so many things. Rights of women, reproductive rights, rights of minorities. I mean, the whole Trump phenomenon.
Right.
So there's a certain humility now in the American approach to this whole idea. And I think that's also a factor in the two countries getting along a little better.
I think that's a really lovely comment, that there is a little bit more humility in Washington, D.C. But well, the questions have started flowing in. And I have a couple of questions already. Michael, would you like to take the first one? This is Paul Smith from Kerala. And Paul wants to know, with the new Quad in the Indo-Pacific, with the Philippines in and India out, does this reduce India's role in the Indo-Pacific?
No, not at all, especially because, the Indo-Pacific Quad continues to be what it is. And this is an entity that has really gained strength and influence and prominence over the last few years, especially, given that all four members of the Indo-Pacific Quad have seen their relations with China fall to one of their lowest levels in quite a few decades. So yeah, short answer is no. I don't see that having any impact on India's influence and clout in the Indo-Pacific, which it has been able to cultivate and strengthen through a number of key multilateral partnerships, most prominently the Indo-Pacific Quad.
Okay. Ambassador Shankar, this is a question from me actually, but I'd like to pick up from what Michael, from where he left off. Now, the Quad itself, India being a key member of the Quad, one of four, India is hesitating about it becoming a security alliance, right? Right now, we're only talking in terms of COVID vaccines, although I'm not sure very much has been done about that. So what is this hesitation of India on India's part? And can I ask you to link this with Ashley Tellis's piece in Foreign Affairs, where he talks about America's bad bet on India. And he mentions this, that because of India's proximity with China. So do you think that that's one of the key hesitations that India has?
Look, firstly, all the rest of the members of the Quad, Japan, Australia, US, are part of an alliance system.
Okay.
India is a strategic partner, it's not an ally. Yes, I think there are hesitations about too overt a security posture in the Quad because of the fact that we share an undefined border with China. And we would like, while we would defend this, we want to upgrade our capacities to be able to do so. We do not seek conflict with China. I would say that is more or less the same position as the US, where the US policy has been articulated as, competing vigorously, cooperating where they can on global issues, and avoiding conflict, inadvertent conflict. So I think that all countries in the region, in the Quad, have an interest in balancing China, in creating an environment where no one country can dominate the Indo-Pacific. But at the same time, I think all four would like to avoid conflict. But I would also add that there are strategic elements to what the Quad is doing. For instance, sharing information on maritime domain awareness. What are the ships which are passing in this region? Secondly, working together on critical and emerging technologies and resilient supply chains, which are looking at all the frontier technologies, which I had mentioned: quantum computing, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, telecommunications, space, cyberspace, and seeing how we can work together, because the basic competition, in a sense, for global economic dominance is going to be technology-led. Mm-hmm. And depending on what technologies you use, you automatically kind of get sucked in to that technological framework. So for instance, India has said that it will, it has not allowed Huawei to bid for our 5G telecommunications networks, right, even though we haven't gone as far as the UK to say that earlier equipment would gradually have to be phased out. Mm-hmm. But so now we are looking at creating this alternative technological framework where we can work together in areas of frontier technology. So I would say that does provide a strategic element. And then there is the economic framework, which has been launched in this. So that also provides, some kind of
things about this convergence.
Yeah.
Okay, Seema, there is a question to you from Mihir from Kolkata, and he wants to know, both India and the US are going in for elections within a year or so from now. India definitely 10 months from now, the US a little bit longer, a year from now. Now, will this affect the outcome of Prime Minister Modi's visit? So quick answer to that.
Yeah, a very good question. The reason why so much activity has taken place in this relationship in this year is because of this very reason, that both countries will get busy in elections. So get as much done as possible. So then after that, lower down officials can take over and keep implementing what the leadership has said should be done. So the direction has come from President Biden. And it's very interesting. I think people should appreciate one fact, that when he was senator and India conducted nuclear tests in 1998, Senator Biden was one of the few Democrats to say that, look, India is too large a country for us to keep under sanctions forever. We have to sort of find a modus vivendi with India. And according to Secretary of State Blinken, that's been his long-term view on this relationship, that it's a very consequential relationship. So he gave the direction, Jake Sullivan ran with it, and sort of White House has managed to bring in all these agencies that speak their own minds. They go their separate ways, and that happened under Obama. There was nobody in the White House who was sort of cracking the whip on all these, on the interagency process. Now there is a whip, and all this is happening this year. And hopefully the joint statement this time that comes after the Prime Minister's visit will be as significant as the 2005 joint statement.
Okay. Ambassador Shankar, a quick question to you from Michael Davis. I don't know where he's from, but the question is that given the fact that the Americans are playing down their concerns about democratic backsliding, within quotes, in India, do you think that the Indians are appreciating this, and that they will similarly paper over the hectoring that sometimes you hear from the Americans? There was this very public row a few years ago between External Affairs Minister Shankar and Pramila Jayapal, one of the Democrats in the US. So do you think that this will be more like a happy kind of visit? Well, not just a visit, but going forward.
Look, Jyoti, I think the American system, people speak their minds pretty freely. And whether it's the media, or whether it is in Congress, or whether it is business, there's frankness sometimes to the degree of bluntness. And I don't think the administration...
Sometimes the Indians misunderstand that, right?
Yeah. So the administration is not in a position to control it. They can't control it when they make fun of Biden's age or whatever, and this is something which, is going to be there, and we have to learn to live with it, not be so touchy about it. I think the key is, what is the policy that the government is following towards us? What is the administration's approach towards us? That is within the control of the US administration. But, what other elements within the US polity are saying, well, I think we should be less touchy about it. Okay. It's a sign of a more mature democracy.
Right.
Secondly, when Seema was mentioning whether the elections will have an impact, I just wanted to mention that I don't think it will, because, this effort to build this relationship, to build trust, to imbue it with substance, has carried on across administrations in the US, whether Democratic or Republican. And similarly in India, it has carried on across administrations.
That's right, across governments.
Manmohan Singh across governments, Manmohan Singh, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, then Narendra Modi, all have tried to build the relationship. So while you might have nuances which may be different in terms of what is prioritized, what is not, I think that there's going to be no disruption in the relationship, irrespective of the outcome of the elections in both countries.
All right. Michael, would you like to take a shot at these questions? Seema, I'll just come to you. Michael.
Sorry, which question?
No, I'm saying that these questions that we've talked about, that the US
right.
deliberately ignoring not ignoring, but sort of toning down its concerns on India's democratic backsliding within quotes. Does India appreciate it? Should it appreciate it much more? And and how do you think this is being seen in DC?
Right. Yeah. Well, very briefly, I would agree with what Seema had said earlier about. I think the phrase she used was humility. That the Biden administration is showing more humility toward India in this conversation about democracy, and indeed acknowledging problems, challenges at home in the United States. And as I had said earlier, I think that's a very useful way to message this rights and democracy issue. It's a safe way to do so. But I think that. This visit next week, I don't think it's the right context to be having this conversation about the rights and democracy issue, because again, it's not going to come up that much. And if it does, it'll be very brief in public remarks. But I think what one could look for in the coming months is, for example, what does the US ambassador do about this issue? I mean, this is someone, we've heard through his own public messaging, he's indicated concerns about these issues. So I think this is some place where we could see the US try to have an impact, maybe by having him meet with members of civil society in India that believe they're experiencing challenges. Okay. That could send a notable message. But so next week is not the time where this is going to be a big issue.
Yeah. We've almost come to the end of our discussion, just a few minutes more, but Michael, can I, and the word Pakistan hasn't come up. So can I ask you, Michael, you've just written a piece on how Pakistan is buying oil from Russia now. Do you think, so tell us the lay of the land between the US-Pakistan relationship and will this have any impact on the ongoing US-India, India-US relationship?
I don't think so. I think that this Russian oil shipment to Pakistan, it's meant to be a trial. Though Pakistani officials claim they want to do more of this, but I think this has to be looked at this point in time as a one-off. I'm not sure, quite frankly, that Islamabad would want to do much more of this, and in some part because it wants to try to manage its relations between Russia and Ukraine. It has been providing arms to the Ukrainian military, which is quite notable. So no, I don't think that we should place too much stock in this commercial arrangement between Russia and Pakistan. Have this conversation a few months from now. If it's clear that you're going to have significant numbers of additional Russian oil shipments coming to Pakistan, maybe it would be a different story. But I think at this point in time, the US is not that concerned about that. I don't know if India should be that concerned about it, because we're talking about limited quantums right now.
Okay. Seema, you had a point?
Yeah, just two quick points. Why Pakistan didn't come up in our conversation is because hardly anyone in Washington talks about Pakistan anymore. Number two, about the values and human rights question, I think something that's not appreciated enough in India is the independence of the US Congress as a separate but equal branch of government. So just 2 days ago, Senator Mark Warner, Senator John Cornyn, both are co-chairs of the India caucus, said a couple of things. One was they are not happy with India's position on the war, on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And they said that now that India has become such an important country, it can no longer take a pass on these big issues of the day. Number two, Senator Warner said that when Modi speaks to a joint session of Congress, we would like to see a recommitment to democratic values. He mentioned freedom of press, he mentioned treatment of opposition leaders, etc., treatment of minorities. So if Prime Minister Modi's speech does not address these issues, Russia, China, human rights, in some fashion or another, that satisfies the US Congress, and these are important senators. They are not
Right.
a minor congressperson.
Sure.
So, because Congress does have a role in what goes, in terms of defense stuff.
Right.
Congressional notification on the GE engine deal has not yet gone. Congress
Okay.
has a role.
Okay.
So,
Thanks, Seema, for pointing that out. Mr. Mehta, you've raised your hand. Would you like to say something? We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I raised a question long ago. When we keep on hearing about human rights situation in India being criticized by whether it's the US Congress or the US, some body or the other, these are human problems. I mean, even the US faces this whole movement about Black Lives Matter, for example. These are all societal tensions which happen, and therefore they get then blown up. That is what we should understand, rather than to put them out. And Seema, just to pick up from your cue, I mean, I'm speaking as bluntly as any American would speak. And look at your own backyard before you point fingers. And whichever is the agency, doesn't matter. Ultimately, there is a national narrative which also develops on many of these issues, whether it's in India or in the US or any other country. Finally, I would like to recognize the presence of Captain Farmer, the US Defense Attaché in the US Embassy here. If he would like to make any comments, particularly, I would like to thank him for having participated in this event. Captain Farmer?
I will say only briefly that I'm excited to see what happens next week with Prime Minister Modi's visit. I think there will be some large announcements that will highlight the direction this relationship is moving, and then it's moving in a direction that is beneficial to both sides, and we'll see some opportunities coming out of this visit. Thank you all for your comments.
Okay. There is one last question from Dr. Ajay Kothari, and he's asked, in the space arena, should India sign the Artemis Accord when Prime Minister Modi goes to the US? Would any of you like to take a crack at that question, Michael? Or Ambassador Shankar?
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, this is clearly something that the U.S. would like to see, and it would help advance the broader science and tech cooperation that's become a key priority for the administration. But I'm not quite sure that we're going to see that happen next week.
Okay.
I also have my doubts whether such an agreement will be signed during the visit. But what you might see is some more specific proposals for cooperation with ISRO.
I see. That's interesting. So I think we don't have any more questions. We've also run out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you, Ambassador Meera Shankar, Michael Kugelman, and Seema Sirohi, for participating in this discussion. Purushendra, would you like to say a few words? Do you want to wrap this up?
Yes, please. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And it was a wholesome event. And we look forward with the outcomes. The expectations are huge. And since the deeper joy is here, the tycoon, and we all are waiting for Modi's visit, our Honorable Prime Minister's visit to Washington, we look forward to that. And we would have a concluding event post our Prime Minister's visit. So this would be tentatively on 10th of July. And I would like to invite everyone to that session as well. Thank you, audience, for being here. Yeah.
Right. So thank you, everybody. And it's been quite an amazing audience, I must say. So thank you all. Thank you very much.